Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Saturday, September 20th, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, a government shutdown could be right around the corner. Plus, we'll take a look at Trump's new immigration fees and some concerns from the right over a push to silence voices in the wake of Charlie Kirk's killing. We begin a newsy Saturday with the latest on the possibility of a looming government shutdown. Funding is set to expire at midnight on September 30th, and President Donald Trump does not appear optimistic that lawmakers will figure something out before then.
We'll continue to talk to the Democrats, but I think you could very well end up with a closed country for a period of time.
I caught up with USA Today congressional reporter Zach Shermley for the latest from Capitol Hill and what might happen next. Hello, Zach.
Hey, Taylor, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me. So I know we saw some moves relating to the possibility of a government shutdown on Friday. How did the chambers tackle this issue to wrap up their week?
Right. It was a busy Friday in the Capitol, and that started with lawmakers in the House of Representatives voting to advance a short-term funding measure that essentially, after September 30th, would keep the federal government funded for the next 7 weeks, just right up until just before Thanksgiving. Now, Republicans supported that measure and pretty much immediately sent it over to the Senate. I was on the Hill and made a very hurried walk over to the other chamber to see how the next vote was going to play out. Senators then took turns voting on dueling government funding measures. There was a similar short-term funding measure that was proposed by Democrats that was shot down, as was that GOP measure that had passed the House. So we are sort of at a standstill now with respect to government funding, and a shutdown is only getting closer.
Well, Zach, as you write, the finger pointing was on full display late this week on Capitol Hill. What did we hear?
Yeah, a lot of finger pointing, which is pretty typical for Capitol Hill these days, but especially in the run up to this potential shutdown. It's only getting likelier and likelier, Taylor, as the days go on here. Democratic leaders are digging into their position, which is that President Donald Trump has not been respecting of the congressional appropriations process, has impounded funds and passed a significant tax and spending law that's going to be rolling back a lot of health care that Americans rely on, and they want Congress to do something about that before handling any government funding protections or measures. Republicans, on the other hand, say that they want so-called clean stopgap funding measure to go through, and they want the government to continue operating while they negotiate with Democrats over those healthcare demands.
All right, well, you mentioned President Donald Trump. I mean, how really does he factor into these discussions, and how will he moving forward?
He made a point on Fox and Friends the other day that really rankled a lot of Democrats, Taylor, which was that he said congressional Republicans didn't need to work with Democrats in order to fund the government. And Democrats that I was speaking with and in their conversations with reporters on the Hill in recent days really had a lot of questions and were shaking their head at that notion, because in the Senate, there's a 60 vote threshold, and Republicans only have a very slim majority in that chamber, so they need the help of Democrats in order to continue funding the government. It still doesn't seem like President Donald Trump wants Republicans to be working with Democrats, certainly doesn't want them to be reversing signature portions of his so-called big, beautiful bill. But we'll see whether or not his posture changes as we probably enter into a shutdown after September 30th.
All right, well, as we move into a new week, I mean, what is the sense from Capitol Hill? Zach, you're there. Is there optimism lawmakers will eventually get something done?
It's kind of gonna be the calm before the storm, Taylor. Lawmakers are gonna be out, actually, of the Hill for the week before the shutdown unless something changes significantly. House Republicans, in fact, probably aren't going to be back until after a shutdown ostensibly begins, and lawmakers over on the Senate side are pretty much just gonna have a day, maybe 2 days to avoid a shutdown before September 30th. So, it's easy getting into a shutdown. Getting out of one is a lot harder. And I'm going to be eager to watch as lawmakers change their strategies or don't, as this sort of inevitability, I think, comes to pass in the next week or so.
All right. Zach Shermley covers Congress for USA Today. Thank you, Zach.
Thanks, Taylor.
President Trump is introducing a $100,000 annual application fee for special visas that are widely used by technology companies to bring in foreign workers. And he signed an executive order to create a gold card for foreigners to pay $1 million to remain in the country permanently, like the residency documents known as green cards. He said the price tag would ensure that only the most extraordinary workers would receive them, with companies paying something similar to a signing bonus in professional sports. Trump's fees are part of his strategy to favor U.S. citizens over foreign workers and comes amid a broader crackdown on immigration, which includes mass deportations of undocumented immigrants and an end to allowing asylum seekers into the country while their cases are pending. The State Department announced last month it would require a $15,000 bond for visa holders under a new program. Vaccine advisors voted Thursday to recommend against allowing parents to choose the combined measles, mumps, rubella, varicella vaccine before the age of 4. Instead, separate vaccine shots will be given for MMRV. Meanwhile, the Advisory Committee of Immunization Practices spent yesterday in a heated debate over safety and efficacy data on COVID-19 shots, but fell short of voting on clear recommendations on eligibility. Instead, panel members voted to promote more consistent and comprehensive informed consent processes and encourage discussion between patients and providers about the risks and benefits of vaccination. You can read more with a link in today's show notes. Charlie Kirk's assassination has ignited a push to silence his critics, but even some on the right are concerned. I spoke with USA Today national correspondent Michael Collins for more. Thanks for joining me, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
So, really interesting piece here. I just want to start with this. How many people that we know of have faced repercussions for remarks surrounding Charlie Kirk's killing?
It's really hard to get a handle on because there have been so many incidents all across the country. But some of my colleagues at USA Today did an analysis, and in that, they found that over 100 people have already been fired or disciplined, or at least have been investigated over public comments that they have made about the death of Charlie Kirk.
Well, I know you start this piece by referencing how noted conservative podcaster Tucker Carlson is approaching this issue. What has he had to say, and how else are some conservatives raising alarm over efforts to shut down and seek retribution against those who have either mocked Kirk's death or been critical even of his political opinions?
Right. Ever since Charlie Kirk was assassinated a little over a week ago, there has been real concern about this movement to try to, shut down any criticism of him, any negative comments about his death, etc. Up to now, those concerns have been primarily raised by Democrats, but you're starting to see some conservatives, some Republicans who now are raising those same issues. As you said, Tucker Carlson, the former Fox News host who now has his own podcast, he suggested this week that the administration was stepping on free speech rights. And he said he hopes that this doesn't result in a push for hate crime laws next year. Also, on Friday, Senator Ted Cruz, who also has his own podcast, he was also very critical of the FCC chairman's pressure campaign against ABC to punish late show host Jimmy Kimmel. He said this was not a good idea, that it could come back to haunt Republicans. And he said using the power of the FCC to punish speech creates a precedent that could be used against Republicans in the future. If you go down that road, he said, there will eventually be another Democrat in the White House, and they could try to do this very same thing and try to silence Republicans.
Well, you mentioned the Trump administration, Michael. I mean, what is the admin's role or stance in all this? How have we seen, I guess, notable figures from that administration tackle this in recent days?
There have been a number of members of the administration who have really weighed in and really tried to silence this criticism. You've had Attorney General Pam Bondi was probably the most noteworthy example. She suggested this week that the Justice Department could investigate people over hate speech. She got a lot of flack over that. And so the next day she backed down and said, well, they would really only investigate speech that incites violence. But still, that worried a lot of people. Then over at the Pentagon, you had Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth saying that people who work for the Pentagon or service members could even be punished or fired for saying something negative about Charlie Kirk. And so there is some real concern that this administration is trying to silence speech that it disagrees with.
There's so many free speech questions this week, Michael. I mean, how is this conversation landing with, I guess, guardians of free speech writ large? What did you hear in reporting this piece?
They're very concerned about it. Some of them say this is reminiscent of the council culture that you Republicans have spent so many years complaining that Democrats are engaging in. One of the free speech guardians that I talked to said this is even worse, though, than cancel culture, because in this particular case, you have the federal government trying to silence speech that it disagrees with, and they find that really, really scary.
All right. Excellent piece from you, Michael. We have a link to the full version in today's show notes. Michael Collins is a national correspondent with USA Today. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
Charlie Kirk will be remembered with a memorial service in Glendale, Arizona tomorrow. The event, titled Building a Legacy, Remembering Charlie Kirk, will take place at State Farm Stadium, home of the NFL's Arizona Cardinals. The celebration of life comes after the 31-year-old was killed while hosting a Prove Me Wrong table, a series of live debates held at schools and universities across the country in Orem, Utah. Tomorrow's expected speakers include his wife, Erica Kirk, President Donald Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and others. USA Today will have complete coverage on the ground at the memorial, so please stay with us for more. Our coverage begins at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. U.S.-born extremism is on the rise and spreading beyond our borders. Active clubs are one of the latest iterations of extremist groups, blending physical training, such as mixed martial arts, with fascism.
This is a male movement, largely looking for kids or people, teens, 20s, 30s. And the reason it's attractive is because they're giving them a home. They're giving these young kids a home, and then they're radicalizing them.
That was Heidi Byrick, Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism. Heidi recently sat down with my colleague Dana Taylor to talk about why the spread of the active club network is so alarming, and why parents need to pay attention to what sites their sons are spending time on. You can hear that episode right here tomorrow, beginning at 5 a.m. Eastern Time. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and you can email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back Monday with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.